All right. Now, please let me know if this fixes the problem. So can you hear me okay? Is that, I sound like Minnie Mouse. All right, I'm gonna click refresh on the browser. Better now? Oh, good. I solved a technical problem all by myself by clicking various buttons. Well, let's see if we can do a quick rehash of everything I just said in a Minnie Mouse voice. I'm laughing, but it's sad. It's sad because a law has been passed in Georgia that oppresses communities of color, that makes it illegal to have more than one Sunday in which to vote, that makes it a crime to bring food or water, if you're a third party, to people waiting in line. And it's been well established that people who frequent communities or who live in communities that are predominantly people of color are more likely to wait for a long period of time. So they're more likely to need help with food and water if the queue is longer than expected and they have to stay hours in order to exercise their democratic right to vote. So yes, illegal to help people out. illegal to provide a pregnant woman with a chair, illegal for third parties to facilitate the quagmire of voting in the US if you are an underserved person of color living in a community where there's so many people of color that Republican state officials have made a conscious effort to provide that community of voting resources, of enough staff members or enough voting machines to be able to have short queue lines. Thank you so much for your help, Chris. I'm glad to have resolved that problem and to now have a serviceable microphone and a more intelligible broadcast. Much appreciated. As you know, I don't have any producers, production assistants. It's just me, so feedback from my audience is invaluable. I will note that this is one of the last few days that Periscope is functioning. It's going to close down in, I think, 5 days' time. So very important, if you do find any value in these broadcasts, to follow me on Haps, which is my new outlet of choice. It allows me to bring up resources. So for example, right now, I can bring up the arrest of Representative Cannon, who is a woman in the state legislature of Georgia, who knocked repeatedly on the door of Governor Kemp's office because he was signing this particular piece of legislation into being. All right, let's see how this is going. Share that. There we go. And then I'll turn up the volume.
Why are they coming all close to her like that? Why are y'all getting all close?
So she's arrested by Georgia state troopers after knocking on the door of Governor Brian Kemp's office.
Why is the governor trying to sign something in private?
Signing of
Why is he keeping a representative?
Controversial elections bill, and it's controversial because it's disenfranchising hundreds of thousands, I guess.
The governor is signing a bill that affects all Georgians. Why is he doing it in private?
Georgia?
And why is he trying to keep elected officials who are representing us out of the process?
Exactly.
And using your guidance and your abilities to talk.
Yeah, you said you give her one more time, like you're going to do something. Are you serious?
No, you are not. Represent.
She's not under arrest.
For what? Under arrest for what?
Right, so it is
For trying
potentially
to see
disenfranchising millions.
something that our governor is doing. Our governor is signing a bill that affects all Georgians, and you're going to arrest an elected representative. Why does the governor have more power than a representative? Why are you arresting her?
That's what I'm asking.
Stop arresting her.
Why are you arresting
Why?
her?
Cite the violation. Cite the code. What is she in violation of? I want you to cite the code. Cite the code. Cite it. What are you? Cite the code. Cite the code. Cite the code. Why are you arresting her? Under what? Under what? Under what law are you arresting her? Why are you arresting her? Why are you arresting her? Tell us now. Why are you arresting her? Cite it. Give me a reason why you are arresting her. Give me a reason why you are arresting her. She is in.
Okay, so that's pretty full on to watch. And I know better than to assume that everybody watches something in the same way as I'm watching it, or that all our experiences are consistent. So to any white people watching that who feel tempted to sympathize with the state troopers of Georgia and say, well, why are they asking repetitive questions? Imagine the adrenaline that you're feeling watching an elected representative be arrested for knocking on a door by state troopers who refuse to answer, what code she's violated or why they are treating her as a criminal rather than an elected representative taking an interest in the passing of an extremely controversial, extremely discriminatory bill. They are pushing forward with a narrative in the pretense that it's not racist and that it's not targeted at Black Americans, at Black and Georgian Americans, that it's not targeted at reducing the voting participation of people who are known to predominantly vote for Democrats. It's not a blanket rule. If you're Black, it's no guarantee that you will cast your vote for a Democrat. But in statistical terms, there's 90% support for the Democratic Party amongst Black populations averaged out across America. Molly notes that women have led the fight of fighting discriminatory legislation. I can imagine that to be true, and people were sharing photographs, black and white photographs, that reminded them of today's events, of Black women being arrested in that way when they're not engaging in property destructive behavior or anything you might associate with criminal activity. They're not violent, they're not jeopardizing any lives or appropriating other people's property for themselves. They are standing up for voting rights. And America, which prides itself so much on the First Amendment and the protections that it affords American citizens, or indeed anybody on American soil to a degree, because many of the amendments have been deemed in court findings to apply to people on American soil, which is why you have birthright citizenship. And there are protections even for migrants under the law. And yes, so Representative Cannon was knocking on Governor Kemp's door because that was a form of protest. She was being excluded. It's unusual to have legislation signing behind closed doors. There was a bunch of white men in the office. Let's see if I can find that photograph. And I'm just going to say again that the law that Governor Kemp just signed makes it a crime for third-party groups to hand out food and water to voters standing in line. All right, so this is the photograph I was referencing. Referencing to that. So I saw them take her by the arms and walk her backwards. So imagining how disempowering it is to be forcibly walked as if you're a child being frog marched to the naughty corner when you haven't committed a crime. She's been charged with two charges. There's been two charges. And I guess they're going to say she disrupted the signing of the bill. And that's not a constitutionally protected speech, that's not something under First Amendment protections, but I imagine it will be argued in a court of law. And she is an elected representative. I'm not one of the lawyers. I'm not legally qualified in American law or any other type of law, but I know that judges still function in a social context. So our efforts at the moment to raise awareness of the treatment of Representative Cannon as she sought to gain access to a room where legislation that will disenfranchise potentially 3 million Georgian voters, because I looked up the population of Georgia, it's 10.62 million, and the population of Black Americans is 31%. So yes, approximately 3 million voters stand to be impacted by this law, which will deprive third parties or criminalizes third party activity that includes bringing food or water to people who have been waiting potentially for hours in a line. Phil says, hello from Denver. Molly says, I have no doubt that there will be a case brought against that bill in the Georgia Supreme Court. Yes. So Rep. Cannon understood there was something wrong with how hurriedly that legislation was passed and with its content. She understood that it was an injustice being perpetrated in the state legislature to which she's an elected member of. So her feelings led her to repeatedly knock on a door despite state troopers telling her to refrain from that. On some level, she understood that she was protesting. She was enacting a protest, and she was subsequently punished for that in the same way that that activists in the 1960s were punished for the audacity of daring to advocate for civil rights for Black Americans. So those people, you would never say, oh, well, their mistreatment was something they willingly entered into as a conscious transaction of rights for brutalization. I consent to be brutalized, or I can reasonably anticipate that white officers will handcuff me and put me through the justice system because of what I'm doing. Therefore, I should have known better. Few people would dare to say that about the activists of the 1960s. I hope people are ready to get with the program now and make it evident that we won't allow criticism, or we won't passively stand by and accept criticism that says Representative Cannon should have kept her nose out of that hurried signing, that hurried secretive signing of a bill that was enacted in order to suppress the vote, and specifically suppress the vote of the majority Democratic voting Black population of Georgia voters. Phil is proposing that corporations need to step up and make Georgia know that suppression won't work. It's true, I guess, and we could say that we're part of that web as consumers to let corporations know that it is intolerable for everybody to stand by as these travesties are enacted. So it's always interesting to say, well, some people will always feel that the course is clear, that you must do the protest in order to signal the unacceptability of certain actions. And other people will say, well, also the overarching goal is to build coalitions, to recruit allies, so that there are people who might not agree with each other about certain things, but who have a point of logical commonality about what letting people vote means, what refraining from putting impedances in the way of voting means for a society that claims to care about democracy. Of course, you have lots of Republicans now who will no longer openly claim to support democracy. They will keep insisting we're a republic, not a democracy, as if the two were mutually exclusive. They decry America's legacy for the rest of the world as having established a representative democracy that was a model for many other nations. And in its efforts to create a bureaucracy and a system of checks and balances to overcome people's baser urges of behaving in tribalistic fashions and orchestrating things to disenfranchise their political opponents and win power for themselves through subterfuge and manipulation. The efforts that America has gone through to introduce systems that would endure beyond the actions of any particular individual of integrity. The efforts that America went through to enshrine integrity into their systems of governance, those systems have been a light on the hill for other nations. And I know of that duality of American exceptionalism, where some people oversubscribe to that notion and say, America, you must, in order to be a citizen, you must wholeheartedly endorse every government action, and you must say America is without flaw. Interestingly enough, a lot of the people who say that often feel very opposed to President Obama. Because what they mean when they say you must unilaterally support America, they often mean you must unilaterally support white America. But in any case, I'm trying to also raise the other side of that dichotomy, American exceptionalism that says America's so terrible. It's never served as an example for the rest of the world. It's always been a front for fascism, or it's always been a front for injustice, and we should overthrow capitalism and have communism because that's worked out so well across history and time and space. So it's always my goal to show that those two extreme positions are not useful, are not conducive to social harmony, are not conducive to prosperity or justice. You have to know what values you're prioritizing. You have to be able to do more than just assume everybody shares your exact values. And I think alliances made with people like the founders of the Lincoln Project, even though some of them have been exposed as, John Weaver was exposed as a secret homosexual who also groomed a 14-year-old boy. Even though those scandals and complications, even though those scandals have occurred around the Lincoln Project, fundamentally their aim, the aim of people within that organization to help oust a despot who was seeking to exploit that uncritical population of adopters of American exceptionalism, the people who say America first, make America great again. They're actually quite critical of America, saying it needs to be made great again. But at the same time, if you criticize America to them, they'll say that you are unpatriotic. And they often call themselves nationalists, which is shorthand for white nationalists. And I should always bring receipts when I say that, because it's when fascism rises, it's easy to fall prey to an adversarial culture where you start making big negative assumptions about your opponents and you start treating them as enemies rather than political opponents. But you always need to treat people as your political opponents unless you're actively at war. Because even if it is a war of psychological influence, the answer to these wars of psychological influence are still the pen is mightier than the sword, still to build alliances through persuasive speech and persuasive writing. The aim is always to build up coalitions and mobilize people to vote out tyrants while there is still remnants of democracy. And that is what happened. Democracy asserted itself, the coalitions held, and Donald Trump was evicted from office. And what a relief that was. But whilst Trumpists were unsuccessful in their effort to overthrow the government via a sacking of the Capitol on the 6th of January, there is still efforts by Republicans to overthrow democracy more broadly by pushing ahead with various measures to restrict access to voting. And that is their way of disenfranchising democratic voters, knowing that the kind of Republican voters who vote for what they perceive to be an advancement to their hip pocket, to their own wallet, that they are often very committed to getting to the polls themselves, and that they are often living in areas where state legislators will organize short poll lines, and they will make voting easier for some people, whilst simultaneously making voting difficult for other populations, and that they can organize that selective targeting. They can redistrict areas to favor the election of white Republican representatives. They don't have to be white, actually. You can have a black Republican representative like Senator Tim Scott, and that will still contribute to very pseudo-populist outcomes for the population. So tax cuts that deliver for the wealthy, temporary tax cuts for the middle class that just evaporate after a certain period of time when the media will not have the concerted focus necessary to communicate to the public the message that this is a Republican move, that this is part of the Republican enacted legislation, that there was a time limit to middle-class tax cuts, no time limit to wealthy tax cuts, but it's not Democrats who've overturned middle-class tax cuts. It is a baked-in function of the Republican tax scam of 2018. Brenda says hello from Evansville. Hello, Brenda. We haven't had any comments for a little bit, but some people are still watching, so I'll just assume that everything is okay. Nope. Trying to find a way. Okay. There we go. Marsha's here. Marsha awarded a Super Heart Award, which is very kind. And I want Marsha to know that it really stayed with me the other day, that you claimed I had helped you stay sane over the 4 years of the Trumpist occupation of the White House, which was psychologically a very difficult time for much of the population who sensed that it was jarring and somehow something seemed to be wrong. Not just wrong in a sense of my candidate lost and I'm sad about it, but wrong in a sense of how did a population that elected Barack Obama for 2 consecutive terms then elect a demagogue who lent towards fascist-style population manipulation by virtue of promoting and amplifying race-based hatred and resentment, which is an irrational response to threat perception from terror groups. And people have identified now that according to polled priorities of people, immigration was the issue that galvanized a lot of Republican voters in the 2016 election. So it wasn't because of healthcare, it wasn't Republicans motivated to oust a Democratic president or to elect a Republican president because they wanted the Affordable Health Care Act to be rolled back. It wasn't the economy. They weren't that upset about how the economy was. They wouldn't have said it was great if they watched Fox News, which always misrepresented the trajectory of the economy under Obama and Biden. But it was immigration, which is to say that it was resonating with a lot of Republican voters, the idea that Democrats were too accommodating of migrants, too naive to the risks posed by potential terrorist sympathizers in any migrant populations and within the Muslim population. That was the galvanizing issue. And every attack on American soil, the San Bernardino shooting, where a husband and wife couple murdered multiple people at a Christmas party, an office Christmas party, or the Pulse nightclub shooting where someone of apparently Muslim background acted out his homophobia by shooting a lot of gay people at a club he himself was reported to have frequented. Each of those incidents helped galvanize Republican votes, people who decided, independent voters, maybe low propensity voters. Low propensity means people who weren't necessarily that likely to vote. Trump galvanized them, and it's one of the reasons why the Republican Party just can't quit him, because that's one strategy for increasing your voting base, is to really motivate people who don't normally make an effort to get involved with politics to believe that this is what stands between them and terroristic bombing of and terrorist shooting events in their communities and in their country. Brenda's still here just listening. Marsha reiterates that I helped save her sanity. Bless you, Marsha. Helped save myself, and it's great to be part of a mutually beneficial collective relationship there, that I'm helping others and deriving benefit to myself from doing so, because I enjoy speaking with people. I enjoy feeling that my words and thoughts have value, and that I'm able to use certain attributes, personal attributes like curiosity, willingness to learn about American politics, willingness to learn about anything, willingness to take a journey and admit previous misperceptions, or just to admit that just as I can change in my opinion over time, so too can I learn about other people in a pragmatic way, to say, what do I need to say to show you that we share values, and that if we find commonality in those values, we can unite in a collective sense politically and achieve good outcomes and achieve safety. And that a lot of the endangerment of the American population in recent years arose because of the deceptive nature of nationalism, the deceptive nature of relying on anti-migrant sentiment to galvanize low propensity voters to turn out and vote for Republicans who are traditionally associated with aggressive measures to protect a population. Aggressive measures aren't always effective or wise or humane. And I'm thinking of the time Americans voted in Republican for a second term, George W. Bush, who instigated a war against Iraq. And that was an aggressive move, ostensibly to safeguard the American population. And it took years of deaths in Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people dying, but also thousands of American soldiers, men and women, losing their lives in conflicts in Iraq, for people to realize it was not increasing the safety of the American population. It was not a well-advised war. It was a war initiated to demonstrate American military might, to deter other terrorists, but the cost of it was very high, and the cost to the Iraqi people was not only very high, but also very unfair, because they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They might have initially welcomed the deposition of a dictator, Saddam Hussein, but it unleashed a host of aggressive, country-destroying forces in their nation, so that not only is there a direct death count from the American attack on Iraq, there's the indirect death count of the destabilization of Iraq and the various religious sects that then increased their own propensity for suicide bombing against each other. Molly also appreciates the broadcast. I know you do, Molly, and I'm grateful. Marsha says, we felt we lost touch with reality and you helped bring us back. Oh, that's nice. That was a goal too, to understand that the American media might not be up to the task of reporting accurately on the Trump administration because of an over devotion to shielding themselves from criticism from the noisy right that whip up fabricated outrage to say, how dare you be left? How dare you be left biased, you left biased media? And to protect themselves from those accusations, they reduced some of their reporting on the scandals, the corruption, the malfeasance associated with the Trump administration. And people are kind of resentful now that reporters have found their courage and are once again being highly critical of a government now that Trump is out of office and nobody's calling them the enemy of the people anymore. They're emboldened to be critical of a president because they're not going to be as attacked for being left-leaning. People on Twitter will criticize them, but more broadly speaking, there is not the broad adoption of the idea that the media is right-leaning. Whereas really the media is right-leaning insofar as its devotion to neutrality, to the perception of neutrality, always privileges liars who shape their narrative in a way that will best manipulate the audience. Whereas truth tellers will just report reality as best they can express it. So because the Republican Party has become devoted to lying, because they are no longer a political party as such, they are a protection racket and a lobby group for the advancement of the interests of the uber wealthy and the well-connected. And they're allied with Russia, where the Russian government is a protection racket for whiteness and heterosexuality and religious conservatism. So they have formed this alliance where Russian money is infiltrating organizations such as the NRA. And the NRA is donating heavily to Republican politicians. And it's become this self-protective racket to achieve tax cuts under cover of a confected culture war in which the hot button emotional issues of conservatives are pressed over and over again. How about marriage? How about gayness? All that flexibility you worry about, all that inclusiveness that you actually deem to be an undermining of Jesus's Christianity's alleged rhetoric that says men must always remain men, and women must always remain women, you must always do certain things, and it's rocking God's boat to suggest otherwise. The prevalence of that idea and that uneasiness, people hold it to different degrees. Some people are uncomfortable with abortion, some people are uncomfortable even with contraception. But it's a continuum that finds a coalition around opposition to modernity and complaints about modernity. So they will focus on the most modern rhetoric of all from the hard left, which often makes as its focus punishing people for linguistic missteps and racist, sexist, or heterosexist microaggressions. So the hard left is often all about the microaggressions, and the pragmatic left is more about achieving broad social justice goals, such as facilitating social mobility. Instead of saying eradicating poverty, which is a sentence that doesn't build alliances with more moderate people on the right, because people on the right believe that to a degree you're responsible for your own poverty. And if you remove all the incentives to escape poverty, then you're creating a communist society in which laziness is facilitated and rewarded by government, redistributing income from the wealthy to the poor. So instead of saying eradicate poverty, doesn't that sound good? I would prefer to stress enhancing social mobility, enhancing people's ability to escape the schedule crushing nature of poverty, in which you can't participate in your children's education. You can't help your kids with their homework. You can't read to them. You can't eat ice cream with them. You can't achieve work-life balance because your wages have been kept at such a stagnant level for so many years through the actions of Republicans sabotaging legislation to improve wages, and Republican voter beliefs that the free market is so important to be left untouched, that the free market is the only generator of good in society and should never be imposed on by bureaucracy or legislation to legislate a minimum wage. That this naturalistic fallacy that says whatever corporations want to pay you, that's what you deserve, and we should just let them do their thing. Whereas, and to always discount the actions of big government in improving the lives of the American people in a collective sense. So yes, the pragmatic left wants to help the minimum wage rise, maybe on a state-by-state basis, because it turns out that a lot of people's opposition to raising the minimum wage through federal legislation is that they think different states have different circumstances that need to be catered for. You don't want to have a disproportionate impact on one state so that then small businesses close down. And that's a fear that I don't relate to personally, and I don't entirely understand that argument. I understand states are different, but business circumstances are different for each business. But yes, Little White Lies asks if a free market really exists. Well, the mob is kind of a free market. It operates in a way that has entirely no respect for the rule of law. So what we really should emphasize is the naturalistic assumptions of libertarians, that the free market must remain free and pure and untouched, and that is the ultimate good and the ultimate political force for good. Are you washing your hands? That ultimate force for good should never be interfered with. And that's what the mob does. They don't respect regulations or rules per se. And that's how the Trump administration worked as well, acting to circumvent the law whenever possible, propelled by deceit and systems of mutual loyalty that helped advance the interests of wealthy people and their cronies, whilst robbing the taxpayer and disproportionately harming poor people, low-income people, who have less of a political voice because they often have less time to be politically active, to coordinate together, etc., which is why you have unions. And to show balance, I will introduce one criticism of unions that I came across the other day, which is that there exists technology now, apparently, to build modular housing to reduce the levels of homelessness in various populations if cheap, easy to construct, good housing could be allowed to proceed, but construction unions have opposed it. So I'm all in favor of the pendulum swinging backwards and forwards, but moving towards just and pragmatically useful outcomes. So you could say I'm a utilitarian in some ways, in that I want the greater good to be served, and I don't want the wealthy people being able to avail themselves of very expensive megaphones that completely crowd out the interests of the underserved and the low wealth people and the minority populations, which have a large overlap with low incomes, but those two populations are not the same. So we shouldn't act as if it's mutually exchangeable to say low population and minority populations. Joe Biden has sometimes done that a little bit, and people got upset and pointed out it was racist. And it is ill-advised, because it's racist to ignore the success of so many Black Americans in pushing through and grabbing whatever social mobility ladders were available and hoisting themselves into the middle class against all odds. But it still has been very difficult at a collective level for Black families to achieve and hold on to wealth. Even the children of moderately wealthy Black Americans have been shown to fall down the social economic ladder into lower tiers over time. It's harder to hold on to those wealth gains. And there's probably a lot of reasons why it's harder to get a bank loan if you're of color, because of entrenched and systematic racism ingrained in many bank practices, and so passed on from person to person in a bank organization, even if they weren't initially racist themselves. It just becomes the path of least resistance to make racist decisions within a large bank. Molly suggests promoting equality and push social programs and education to help minorities move upwards. Yes, but just eliminating starvation wages, like $7 an hour, which force people to hold multiple jobs and therefore don't allow them to spend time with their families, to grow their children's potential. Parental involvement is one of the most predictive factors of a child's educational success. So if you have low income, it's not that you don't have genes to inherit that are brainy genes. It's your children are less likely to be able to benefit from your love and your emotional investment to encourage and inspire them, because you don't have time to connect with them and you don't have the leisure, or you're too exhausted to be able to help them read or show excitement or pleasure when they do succeed in some way in an educational setting. It's not impossible to do so, but it's more unlikely if you're subject to the constant and escalating pressures of being on the edge of a financial cliff at all times, because you can only afford to rent large ticket items like cars or white goods. You can only, because that's more expensive over time than it is to outright purchase big ticket items. You're exploited by predatory lending practices. You're enhanced by things that say, consolidate your student loan and we'll give you a $5,000 check. And then you're stuck in these loans that are no longer, you're no longer able to qualify for government relief programs that help eliminate your student debt or reduce it. So there's lots of ways in which people from relatively impoverished background are tempted into sabotaging themselves. So there's lots of ways in which Democrats can help organize less hardship for Americans, less destructive, soul-corroding hardship. And Black students who try to get into the middle class through expensive educations are often taking on a lot more personal debt because of lack of supportive family wealth. Their families are less likely to own homes that they can take out a second mortgage on. It's almost as if the price of education has been raised to make it more difficult and less attractive for Black Americans to even take on that pathway to success. Marsha says the credit score has ruined opportunity for many middle class and lower middle class workers. Interesting. I'll have to learn more about that. Anyway, I've spoken for 48 minutes. We've covered Representative Cannon's arrest, Governor Kemp's signing of a piece of legislation that will make it harder for people to vote in Georgia particularly if they live in a community where wait times are long. And maybe I should bring up, no, I'm sure you guys can find the references as well. There's lots of references out there where it's been statistically proven that the average wait length time for a voter in a predominantly Black community is far longer than the wait times for white people in predominantly white communities. Little White Lies points out that yes, poor people can afford to pay $1,500 rent but can't qualify for a $1,200 mortgage. Yes, and the injustice of that is self-perpetuating and it entrenches poverty. But it should also motivate us to keep describing what is wrong with the economic view espoused by a lot of Republican politicians and Republican voters. That not only is it not true that pulling yourself up by your bootstraps isn't always possible, but that there are these endemic problems that are covering people's bootstraps in little spikes. The compound interest of student loans instead of simple interest that makes it, that compounds, exacerbates the disadvantage experienced by students who don't have the family wealth to rapidly pay off their student debt. It means if it takes you longer to pay off your student debt, the problem is exploding for you over time because the interest is calculated based on not just what remains of the principal to be repaid, but that principal plus any interest that's been generated so far. So the interest is calculated based on principal plus interest that exists. So your debt snowballs, snowballing debt. We need easy to understand analogies of how, yes? You hungry? Okay, well, let me say goodbye. Do you want to get yourself some more strawberries? Or you want another sandwich? Or are you thirsty as well?
I'm thirsty and I want a sandwich.
What kind of sandwich? And I have sandwiches. You're my beautiful girl. Beautiful girl. All right, let me say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. I'll go feed my child some more. She is hungry. She's a hungry girl, and she's getting over a cold. Are you feeling much better today?
Yeah, I think tomorrow I'll be better.
And that's good. I think you're nearly all better today. Maybe we need to put a little bit more cream. Your skin is a little bit dry. Okay, well, we'll talk about it. Marsha says goodbye. Yeah, that's you. That's you, Munchkin. You're making noises like a monster now. Are you? It's like you're fascinated by your own little face and that's you. That's you. Marsha's glad you're better. See? People are like, yay. Yay that you're better. It's because you ate you ate more veggies yesterday and you've got to keep eating them today. She's very good at eating cucumber. What else are you good at eating? Capsicum. Strawberries, yeah. Are you good at eating capsicum?
If you want me I will eat 10 more packets of strawberries.
Yeah, I know there's no obstacle between you eating as much strawberries as you can, but what about your other vegetables? What about your carrots?
Yeah.
You eat carrots today? No? Maybe one piece. Helps you get better. And you did a good job of getting the clay out of your hair. I'm proud of you. That would have been tricky. She got some air drying clay in her hair just before I started the broadcast, and I said, just sit down while you watch TV and slowly pick it out of your hair, and you did. You didn't have to chop off your hair, which was good. Good chopping.
Look who I'm touching commented.
She said, can she take over your show one day? She has sometimes. She sat down and told everybody very seriously that brushing your teeth was something you had to do every day. Yeah? And once she told everybody that they had to vote for President Biden, they had to vote for Joe Biden to be president. Do you have any advice for everybody today? What should people do to stay safe and happy? Should they do exercise? Keep voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Would you like to be president one day? You can't be president. You weren't born in America, but you could be something. Just. All right, well, I'm going to say goodbye. Everybody, so when I click this button, it will end the broadcast, okay? So should we say, I'm going to say shalom. That's Hebrew. That's goodbye in Hebrew. Okay. Shalom and namaste. Can you say anything? Can you say namaste? Can you say shalom? You don't even know shalom because I haven't taught you.
Ooh, that comment.
Oh, you like that comment? What does that say? Yeah, it says she's very intelligent. She can read. She's a good reader. All right.
I read chapter book.
I
one time read a whole chapter book by myself.
That's very good. A whole one.
Remember Billy B. Brown?
Oh,
I
yeah,
read
Billy
the whole one.
You read the whole one. You are very good.
All by myself.
Yeah, you're an excellent reader, and I'm very proud. Oh, Marsha said shalom, and she said almost Shabbat shalom, because on Friday nights it's Shabbat. I'll go tell you about what that is. We're very secular Jews over here, but it's good to learn about traditions. Traditions are a way to formalize happiness in a way, formalize family celebrations and happiness. All right, take care, everybody. Stay safe. Have a good night's sleep. Shabbat shalom and namaste. Oh, no, not Shabbat shalom yet. Shalom. Bye.